Good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to the second talk in our 8th series of PD expert briefings run by the Parkinson's Disease Foundation. This is entitled Parkinson's Disease Financial, Legal, and Medical Planning Tips for Care Partners. As those of you who are regular attendees of our webinars know that most of our work is directed at the medical information and the scientific information connected with Parkinson's. This particular topic goes further than that into the financial and estate planning aspects, which we know is of equal, in some cases more than equal, interest to our participants. So it's a very important feature in our series, and we have, as usual, the good fortune to find a very, very qualified and multi-lettered expert to lead our discussion. Mr. Martin Shenkman is an accountant with a CPA. He is a lawyer with a JD. He is a business professional with an MBA and 2 or 3 other sets of initials, which I really don't understand quite, but he's a multi-talented fellow. And in our minutes leading up to this, when I asked him about all this stuff, he said, "My mother just wished I could be a doctor." So he will tell us about that if he needs a bit of therapy on that one during the course of the talk. But we're thrilled to have him. This series is being designed, as have previous series, in collaboration with members of the group we know as the Alliance for Independent Regional Parkinson's Organizations, or AIRPO. This is a group of regional affiliates of PDF, which we established some years ago, and which has become a major contributor and partner to the managing of Parkinson's nationwide. So we're thrilled to have them as co-partners here. I also want to send a big thank you, a ringing thank you, to our sponsors for the series, who provide the financial wherewithal to make this possible: AbbVie Incorporated, Acadia Pharmaceuticals, and Lundbeck, LLC. We could not, of course, do this without their support, at least not at the very professional level we do the series, and we're very grateful to those 3 very prominent pharmaceutical companies for all they do to help us. Just to note, for those of you who are not already aware of this, most of you are, the PowerPoint slide deck that Mr. Shenkman will be speaking from can be downloaded from the reminder email you received this morning, or alternatively from the PDF webpage highlighting this talk. Our website address is www.p as in Peter, D as in David, F as in Frank.org. If you are a health professional, we have many who join us for these occasions. You can earn 1 free continuing education unit, in this case through the American Society on Aging. If you register as a health professional and indicate you would like a CEU, you'll receive an email by the end of the day with steps on how to collect this. And you have just 30 days after that, until the 8th of December, to collect the free CEU. So I think we're ready to start in. Mr. Shenkman has a wonderful set of slides, which he'll speak from. He has asked us to give him a 2-minute notice, so don't be surprised or alarmed if you hear my voice popping up saying, "Mr. Shenkman, 2 minutes more." That was by prior arrangement. I also have to say that there's one area, if you are brimming with questions, that you may want to forego, namely anything involving state-specific Medicaid questions. This is a highly abstruse area. They vary from here to there, and he would prefer it if you would please not ask him state-specific questions during the course of the seminar. Other things are fair game, and so he looks forward, as I do and the rest of us, to hearing your questions going through. As you know, again, if you are old hands at this, you submit your questions through the web. We have a small army of people taking them, sitting across the table from me, and they will transmit it to me, and we'll try to reformulate questions, sometimes combining them, so they can be as economical and as direct as possible, and we'll have the benefit of Mr. Shenkman's comments on those as the time arrives. So, Mr. Shenkman, thank you very much for joining us. I don't think we need to give a huge amount on your very distinguished background. Author of 42 books, 1,000 articles. How you do this and practice those 3 professions I already mentioned is quite beyond me, but you clearly are a fellow of great efficiency or who doesn't sleep. maybe both. He has personal experience and motivation to the work based upon his own wife's experience, which she lives with multiple sclerosis, and his late brother's fight with Parkinson's itself. So it's very special connections, and make his talk really from the heart as well as from the head. He received his MBA from the University of Michigan, a law degree from Fordham University in New York, was admitted to the bar in New York, New Jersey, and Washington, and with a CPA in New Jersey, Michigan, and New York. So he's been everywhere with everything, and we're just delighted to welcome him today. Mr. Shenkman, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let's begin. Just in case you were concerned that I wasn't really a lawyer, there's a disclaimer. I would encourage all of you to capture and download and print and save the PowerPoint. I've made a big effort to give you a lot of information that's well beyond what we can possibly cover in the brief time today, and I've done that because I'd like and hope that this will be a resource to help each of you transform your lives, whether you're a caregiver, somebody living with Parkinson's, or somebody that guides and consults those with Parkinson's. I hope that this will help you in a significant way. And the introduction, my wife was diagnosed 10 years ago with MS, and as an author, an estate planner, an attorney, and accountant, I was absolutely appalled that the professional literature had literally nothing on how to plan, not just for multiple sclerosis specifically, but on chronic disease generally. There was literally almost nothing available as resources. And I kind of made it my personal mission to create those resources so that consumers and professional advisors looking to help consumers facing different challenges of different chronic diseases could find those resources. And much of the articles and books that I've published in recent years have been focused on different chronic diseases. And the goal is to educate and empower. And what I want to do with this presentation and this slide deck is empower you to help yourself. You need to take control. You must be proactive, because if you are, you can have a huge impact on the future of your life and your financial, legal, and personal security. Now, first, I want to completely change your view of what estate planning is. When most people hear the word estate planning, they think, oh, I need a will. That's important, but it's not a significant part of what estate planning really is. It's a much broader process. It has to be more about planning for life than planning for death. I want to be upbeat. I want to help you be as secure and as safe as you can be for the remaining, hopefully, many decades of your lives. And estate planning is critical to doing that. But you're never going to accomplish what you can to protect yourself if you don't redefine it differently and more broadly than what most people do. So it's planning for life. And the concept in the first bullet point, it's about providing peace of mind. That may sound vague, fuzzy, and almost hippie-ish from the 70s, but it really is. And as we go through this slide deck, I hope to help you understand how you can give yourself more security and peace of mind. And estate planning done properly integrates a wide range of different disciplines. Your investment planning, your insurance planning, practical emergency steps, disability planning, retirement planning. If it sounds daunting, it is, and what I've tried to do is break it out into 12 set steps to help you focus on one at a time. And I can tell you that every step in this slide deck, my wife and I have tackled ourselves, and I can tell you that many of these steps were done over years of time. So, for example, we went paperless in terms of our personal documents. It's an empowering and very important safety step because it helps minimize the risk of somebody stealing documents and committing identity theft. It makes it easier to have control over our finances and our legal documents. It took us 4 years. We never spent more than a few hours on a weekend scanning documents. It took 4 years, but we got there. So many of the things I'm going to tell you about can be done quickly. Many of them will take time, but if you simply start moving forward, you will make incredible progress. And I promise you that 3 to 6 months from now, if you take a few steps a week, you will look back and feel incredibly empowered as to where you are today with what you've accomplished. So don't get discouraged. Don't get overwhelmed. Let's go through the process. Now, what's unique about planning, estate planning, financial planning, if you're living with PD or a loved one has PD. It's really the same core planning. So I'm not going to teach you or mislead you to think there's something special. You don't need an accountant, an attorney, a will specifically designed for somebody with PD, but every aspect of planning must be modified, must be tweaked, must be tailored, and it's not tailored to meet issues of PD generally. It's to specifically fit your challenges. So if you have young onset YOPD, young onset Parkinson's, your situation, because of your younger age, may be different than somebody that is 20 or 30 years older. So let's go through this. Bear in mind, everything needs to be done so it works for you. It needs to be redefined so how it fits and affects and helps you with your specific challenges. So an example, and we'll go through each of these more significant, in more detail as we go through, and there's going to be action steps for every one of these to elucidate. But let me just start with one example. A power of attorney is a document that every adult, everyone 18 and over, must have. It's conceptually a very simple legal document. It's a document that you name an agent, a person called an agent, and give them the power or authority to take care of legal, tax, and financial matters if you cannot do so. Now, the standard form you may get from an online website, or if you have the financial means to hire an estate planning specialist, all the better. And by the way, I'm very cognizant of that fact, and as we go through this, the planning ideas I give you will work. You may have to interpret them a little, whether you're hiring an expensive estate planning specialist or whether you're having to use an online website for legal documents or planning because you can't afford more. So I want to cover the full spectrum. But the standard forms for a power of attorney alone may not suffice. For example, many standard power of attorneys, whether from an online website or an attorney, don't address the issue of compensation. If you're going to need somebody to help you with paying your bills and handling your banking and your financial matters for decades, it may not be fair not to compensate them. So look at that issue in a standard form. Make sure it makes sense for your experience. That's just one illustration of how a standard document may be modified to address your needs. Let's go on. Now, there's 12 steps. We're going to get through as many as we can in the time that we have. And again, there's lots of resources following the slides that will help you later. So each person is unique. It has to be your plan, address your challenges. Be mindful that you don't want to do something that's boilerplate or standard. You need to think it through. The planning that you do, your tax, financial, estate planning, needs to reflect your personal wishes and circumstances. Example, if you have very strong religious beliefs, don't create documents and planning that ignores them. You can integrate your religious feelings into your plan. It's not just disease-specific, it's personal to you. If you create a strong foundation of planning, of documents, you will be able to build a great safety net. The planning steps are not discrete steps. You don't do it and think you're done. Most people think they've signed a will, they have an estate plan, it's over. Thankfully, I can go on and do other things and not have to deal with this. Not the right mindset. This is a process. It's not about signing a document. You want to begin the process. You want to break it, as I said earlier, into manageable steps. You want to stick with it. It's fine if it takes you years, as I said with my wife and I going paperless. Lots of steps can take long periods of time, but get on the path. If you don't start the path, you will make no progress. If you start the path and even make small progress each week, you will make incredible progress over time. Before you begin, you have to start gathering information. Now, the optimal way to plan is to have an attorney, an estate planner, do documents. Have a CPA to help you with financial forecasts and income tax planning. Have an investment advisor, financial planner, wealth manager, whichever term you use, help you with your investments, an insurance consultant. If you do not have the financial wherewithal, you still need to address these different disciplines and issues. So don't tune out and say, oh, I can't afford all that. No, you're going to address this even if you use online tools for each of these functions. Start thinking about the process. Think about what you need, what your concerns are. Bear in mind that PD affects every aspect of planning. Don't rely something that's standard, but in many cases, small little modifications will make otherwise standard planning work wonderfully better for you. Be careful to understand that many of the advisors, many of the websites that you consult do not contemplate or understand chronic disease. Many people, if they don't specifically see what an issue is, don't understand that. So the fact that I'm thinking in the context of my wife, so often people say, oh, you look so good. It doesn't mean how you feel or the challenges you face aren't there. So be mindful that the people you consult with, if you hire an attorney, you need to be proactive and inform them of what your challenges are. Don't assume that somebody that's not been touched by PD understands what it does, what it means to you. I'm going to skip through a bunch of slides as we go just for the sake of time. Don't be alarmed. You have all the materials. You can print them. When you consult with an attorney, explain what your symptoms are. If you're going to handle this on your own, sit down and maybe even make a list of what your symptoms are and what they might be, so that as you go through the planning, you can think, how might this affect what I'm doing? How might this affect the planning? All right, that's the background. Let's jump in and get through as many of the 12 steps as we can. Step 1, organize emergency financial and advisor information. Passwords and security codes. I'll tell you what I use personally. I bought an app called Keeper Security. I don't own stock in the company. I'm not promoting it. My wife and I have that app on our phones. The kids know the access information. Every password, every account number, everything that we have is there, so that if we can't remember or locate something, it's there, and immediate family members know how to access it. Existing estate planning documents, we have everything scanned so everyone knows where it is, and our originals are in one location. Legal documents that are critical, deeds, so on and so forth, all in one place. Income and expense information, budgeting information, we have all that. We do everything on Quicken. I believe the optimal way for everyone is to get everything organized on computer. It's incredibly empowering. I wish I could give you a whole lecture on just how you can use a program like Quicken to help yourself as your disease progresses, because the reminders and other things you can do, the budgeting tools are incredible. Advisor contact information. And think of the term advisor. It's not just your lawyer. If you have a priest, somebody should be contacted. If you have physicians, who should be contacted? Your bank, not just the bank, but who do you deal with, what branch, where they are. Getting all this information organized and making sure that in an emergency somebody knows where to access it is absolutely critical. Again, from a personal perspective, I use an app on my smartphone that's accessible online for much of this. It's inexpensive, great to do. You need to organize all your investment information. What assets do you have? One of the problems that most people that I meet have is what I call investment clutter. Every account you have, ask the question, why do I have an account? Is there a legal or tax reason for another account? You do not want accounts in a dozen different institutions. As your disease progresses, as you age, it gets harder and harder to keep track of that. The more simplified and organized things are, the better. Once you've organized things, the middle bullet point in the first item there, duplicate statements, is a no-cost way to provide a great check and balance. If you consolidate all your assets, all of our investment assets are in one place, all our checking accounts with one bank, we get a statement from each that consolidates all those accounts. So basically the deed from our condo that we live in and those two statements is almost everything we own on 3 packs of paper. You can easily at no cost have your bank, your trust company, whoever it is where your investments are consolidated, send a duplicate monthly statement to somebody. What an incredibly powerful tool. If you start to have an impact on your executive functioning, your ability to balance and manage your finances or balance a complex statement, and your brother, for example, is getting a duplicate statement, he can spot those issues. He can make sure no one's taking advantage of you. Very powerful tool. Ideally, the person getting that duplicate statement could be a CPA if you can afford it. If not, make it a family member. Make it somebody other than the person you've named as an agent on your financial power. Budgeting is essential. If you run out of money, all the planning is not going to help. We don't have time in this brief amount of time to go through it, but be very mindful that you have a budget. However rich or poor, you need a budget. Most people hate the process of having to put a budget together. They think it constrains them. To the contrary, it's empowering. If you have to cut back a little, but it assures you're not running out of money for the last decade of your life, it's well worth cutting back. I use some simple-minded analogies to help illustrate. My rocket ship example, if you're shooting a rocket ship to the moon and you're an inch off today, you can miss by 100 miles later. The point is that if you're spending a little bit too much today, 10 or 20 years from now, compounding that overspending, even if it's a modest amount, can have a huge negative impact. The sailboat, if you're familiar with sailing, you can't sail into wind. The sail just flaps. You have to tack back and forth. So the fact that you create a budget doesn't mean you're living on a budget. Nobody can be that rigid. So face the reality. Some years you'll overspend, some years you're going to underspend, but get back to reality and keep doing it. Now, just to show you, every slide, every step is followed by action steps. I'm going to skip those because we don't have the time. They're there as checklists to help you get going. So listening to this presentation, if you do nothing, is accomplish nothing. Go step by step through the plan, take the action steps that work for you, and try to move forward. Let's go to our next step, power of attorney. Everyone over age 18, every adult needs a power of attorney. If you're incapacitated, if you can't take care of legal, tax, or financial matters, you need to designate somebody that can. If you don't do that, a court will have to step in, which requires a guardianship proceeding, costly, unpleasant, not what you want to do. A simple power of attorney can work. You need to consider whether you're giving a broad power called a general power or a limited power. How much right do you give the agent? If you really, truly, totally trust the agent, that's fine. The agent's the person you name to sign checks and take care of legal matters if you can't. If you need to build in checks and balances, which I encourage you to do, have duplicate statements, as we said in step 1, go to somebody other than the agent. If you can, consider naming joint agents so that two people have to sign. It's a bit cumbersome administratively, but it may give it an important check and balance. Compensation, should the agent be compensated? When does the power of attorney become effective? Many use something called a springing power. It's not legal in all states, but it is in most, which only becomes effective when you're disabled. I don't know what that really means. How do you prove disability? What if you're having a bad stretch and not feeling well and need someone to help? If the power is springing, it won't be effective. So maybe it's better to do a power of attorney that's effective immediately. There's another concept that you need to be mindful of called durable. A durable power of attorney is one that remains effective even if you're disabled. It's just a historical anachronism that if you don't have the magical words in your power of attorney that comport with state law saying it remains valid even if you become disabled, the power could lapse when you're disabled, which is the very reason you're doing it. Sorry to be technical, but that's just a really important point you want to be mindful of even if you are doing the document online. There are some things that you may want to consider in making the power of attorney work. So just as one example, the third bullet point. You can get the best legal power of attorney anywhere, but if you don't organize your finances, as I discussed in step 1, if you don't have your expenses organized, how will somebody step in and know what to do? Let's say you've named your oldest daughter to be your agent. If you reach a point where she has to step in and take over your finances, if you have a dozen different bank accounts and she's got her own family, her own career, how is she going to have the time to keep track of all it? Simplify, consolidate. And this is a really critical take-home point. Getting a good legal document is not the end of the planning process. It's never enough. Getting a good legal document, a power of attorney, is essential, but if you don't organize your finances, if you don't have a list of expenses so somebody knows what bills to pay, you've really not accomplished enough. There's a statistic. 38% of women 65 and older have their long-term care insurance policies lapse, and the primary cause of long-term care policies lapsing is lack of payment of premiums. These folks have not organized their finances, signed a power of attorney, and made sure their agent knows what to do. Step 3, health proxy. Every adult needs to have a health proxy that designates an agent to make medical decisions. The agent will have powers that should not be combined with a financial power of attorney. It must be a separate legal document. Make sure that you sign it with the formalities required under your state law. What I recommend regardless is have a notary and 2 witnesses, and make sure not the notary nor the witnesses are people that could stand to inherit under your will, because that could invalidate it in some states. I would do that because wherever you may move or travel, you want the document to continue to be viable. If you have no family members or loved ones that you can comfortably name to make medical decisions, take a look at a legal document called a POLST, P-O-L-S-T, Physician Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment. Your doctor can put it in your medical chart, and that could duplicate or replace a health proxy if you have no agent. As noted here, consider religious issues. Most standard forms and online forms don't. Frankly, most lawyer-prepared forms don't either. If you have a strong religious belief, don't violate it. There's no reason to. Your documents can be conformed to address it. In your healthcare proxy, designate that you want your agent who's named in that document to be a guardian should you ever need a guardianship proceeding so that the court doesn't choose who should be in charge of your personal decisions. You will make that choice. Let's go to another step, step 4, living will. I apologize that the living will, the health proxy, and there's another document called a HIPAA release all sound kind of similar and confusing, and why do we need different documents to deal with medical issues? It's an unfortunate complexity of how the law is developed, but you do need to do it. The health proxy that was step 3 is a document in which you name an agent to make medical decisions. The living will of this step is a document that you set forth your personal wishes. So that the health proxy names an agent and gives the powers and rights to the agent. The living will is more of a statement of things that you want, lifestyle choices, end-of-life decisions. If you're living with PD, there's a number of things that you may want to specify. For example, do you want experimental medical treatments? If I knew that there was an experimental treatment that could have a significant impact on the health challenges that I have, I would want that. Do you want that? Not all forms address it. It's a specific decision you want to make sure you address. Do you want to donate central nervous system tissue, brain tissue for research to help PD research? Express that. Do you have specific desires for how funeral or burial should be handled? Address that as well. Step 5, if you have a child, especially a minor child, you need to take steps to protect that child. Disclose child care information and medical information for the child in the emergency data that we talked about in step 1. Make sure you have proper insurance coverage and disclose that too, so if you're traveling or you get sick and a child needs care, somebody knows about health insurance and other issues. You certainly need a guardian named, but you may need more formal care arrangements because you may be alive but still need help taking care of your child. So again, make sure you take steps to address that. Now, step 6, I want to pause and take a breath, and I apologize I'm going fast, but there's lots of important stuff to cover, and you'll have lots of action steps and checklists and materials if you download them. Step 6 is a will. Now, pause for a second. Why is this only step 6? Gee, if you're talking about estate planning, isn't the will the most important thing? Your will has nothing to do with PD. Nothing. Nothing. All the other slides, all the other planning has to do with protecting you and your loved ones in light of PD. Your will is your will. It's really no different than anyone else that has a will. Your will provides for the distribution of assets on death. You may choose, which we'll talk about in a minute, but in a different context, a revocable trust. But a will simply distributes assets. It's not that it's not important, but it's really not the focus of caring for you for what might be decades of future life. It's really not going to have any impact on how you are cared for or your finances protected as you age or as your disease progresses. So let's leave that, because not that it's not important, but it's not really any different than what anyone else does. Now, there's another document that can serve a similar purpose to a will, but can be applied in an incredibly more powerful way, a revocable trust. If you're not familiar with the concept of a trust is a legal document where you can name a trustee, and in this type of trust, you can be your own trustee. You put assets in the trust, so the trust, not you, owns the assets. And then on your death, these assets would pass without the need for probate. That's, if you Google search and look online on revocable trust, that's going to be almost everything you hear about. That's not why we're talking about revocable trust here. not why it's such a powerful tool to help you if you're living with PD. And this is not the normal application you will hear from most lawyers or most materials that you find online, but it's one of the most powerful things you can do. If you get a revocable trust and you put assets in the name of the trust, you can now name a bank or trust company as a co-trustee or successor trustee. If you have sufficient financial wherewithal to name an institutional trustee like a trust company, there is nothing more powerful you can do to protect yourself from aging or the challenges of PD as your disease progresses. Every bank, every trust company has a whole array of internal controls and procedures, what people often dismiss as red tape, but that red tape can be incredibly protective to you. As a revocable trust, it will be easier if you name an individual as a successor trustee when you can't serve, or as a co-trustee to serve with you, which you really can't do in a power of attorney as effectively. It's easier in most cases for a trustee under a revocable trust that you create to help you pay bills and handle your finances than it is for an agent under a power of attorney. We don't have time to get into all the technicalities, but that is often the case. With a revocable trust, you can assign, and I always do this, you can get a different tax identification number for the trust instead of your Social Security number. You go to irs.gov, you can apply and get a tax ID number for your revocable trust, and then the bank and brokerage account you open, use that name of the trust and the tax ID number you've just obtained, not your Social Security number. Why is that so important? I believe that it is much, much more difficult for any of the scam artists, the thieves, the people that commit elder financial abuse, identity theft, to scam a revocable trust than it is to scam you. I know that when I've gone to this doctor appointment, my Social Security number is all over my medical records. The charts, in spite of whatever efforts the physicians make, are often left on counters, and nurses leave them on tables when there's other people walking by. Your ID number for the Rev Trust is never there. So this can be a very, very powerful tool to supplement, not replace, the power of attorney that we talked about earlier. Now, insurance, next action step. Please don't only think of life insurance. Take a look at the slide. Property and casualty insurance. Do you have enough? If you're struggling with PD and you get hurt, what kind of coverage is there? Do you have disability coverage? Do you have long-term care coverage? Review your insurance. You may not, if you've been diagnosed with PD, qualify to get long-term care coverage. Your spouse or partner very well may be able to still get it. If you have long-term care coverage and you've been diagnosed with PD and you haven't made a claim, review the policy. See if there's any disclosure or reporting requirements. See if there's benefits that you're not claiming that you're entitled to. If you have disability insurance, are you making a claim? Have you made a claim? Review these things. Life insurance is an incredibly powerful tool. You may not qualify to buy new insurance. You may have existing insurance. Within a few weeks of my wife being diagnosed with MS, I called our insurance agent and I told him I want to convert our term insurance to permanent insurance. I knew my wife had whatever the top health rating was on her term insurance. I knew after getting diagnosed with MS she was never going to get insurance with anything but a very strong rating that would be very costly. So I converted existing insurance. Liability coverage. Even if your PD has no impact on your ability to drive, if you are in an accident and the other party's attorney discovers that you have PD, might they not argue that the accident was your fault due to symptoms of PD, even if that's not the case? Make sure you have significant liability coverage. Everybody that owns an apartment, a home, drives a car should have an excess liability policy, because your homeowners and your auto policies generally have only modest coverage limits. With PD, it's even more important. It is not usually very expensive at all to add even another $1 million or $2 million of coverage to a personal excess liability policy. Please look into that if you have not done that. The key point of Step 8, look at all of your insurance coverage. Look at it not only from the perspective of PD, but look at it from the broad perspective of, do you have everything you need? Are you taking full advantage of what you can? Step 9, beneficiary designations. When you're looking at estate and financial planning, beneficiary designations are quite important, because for the vast majority of Americans, Most of your assets don't pass by your will or your revocable trust. They pass by beneficiary designation. Your IRA or 401k pass where your beneficiary says. Your insurance policies pass by your beneficiary designation. Make sure you review those. If you are a beneficiary of a family member's IRA or insurance policy, perhaps you shouldn't individually be named, but rather a trust for you should be named so that those assets are protected, whether from Medicaid or if you need help managing them at a future date. So always review beneficiary designations. It may be possible to make some significant improvements. Now, going through this process myself, I've added a different step 10. I have found that giving back is vital. I think that's why we're on this planet. I think if you can give back, no matter how difficult your situation, you will find many others with far more challenging circumstances than yourself. If you don't have financial wherewithal to give, there's other ways to give. Even making a small donation can help thank the people from the different charitable organizations that have helped you. Even if you don't have the financial wherewithal to give, you can give by inspiring others to give. You can use giving and donations and charitable work to demonstrate to your heirs what important values are about. Estate planning should not be merely about the transmission of wealth, but also about the transmission of values. Thank those that have helped you. Giving back will empower you and help you feel good about the process. Step 11. Now, this may sound trite, but it's absolutely critical, and it's one of the biggest, and I've been working as an estate planner for 35 years. One of the biggest problems in most estate plans is not that the will wasn't complicated or detailed enough or that some of the planning wasn't done, is that nobody communicated. If you name your eldest daughter or your Aunt Jane or your Uncle Joe as a trustee or as an agent to help you, if you don't have a conversation with them, how will they possibly know that they are serving in that capacity? How will they know what they need to do? Even a simple conversation, Joe, you're the agent under my power of attorney. Oh, what does that mean? It means if I can't take care of bill paying or financial matters, I need you to step in. Well, what do I do? Well, I have everything on Quicken. The password for my computer is located in this online app called Keeper Security. Your wife's first name and the town you lived in combined is the password. If you need to get in, you'll find everything there. All my bills, all my records are in Quicken, and once you access Quicken, you'll be fine. If you don't know how to use Quicken, call Jane Smith. She's my CPA. Her number's in the emergency information I gave you. Having a simple discussion with the people you rely on will educate and inform them. You need to do this. The vast, vast majority of people, in my experience doing estate planning for 35 years, don't have those conversations. They'd rather take the simple-minded approach, gee, I signed a will, or I did this, I did that, I'm done. You need to have these conversations. And you need to have them on a somewhat ongoing basis. Every couple of years, every year, people forget. Where's your stuff organized? Communication is critical. And as I said in the beginning, every one of these steps is followed by a list of action steps of things you can do. Now, when we started this discussion, I said, do not assume because you sign documents, a power of attorney, a will, a revocable trust, that you're done. I said it is a process. Step 12 reinforces that, and it's one of the 12 steps because if you don't review and revise on an ongoing basis everything you have, it will not in a few years work. Your emergency list will not work in a few years. You may have new medications, and a list of medications or physician contacts 2-3 years from now may be completely wrong, and it's not going to help somebody stepping into help you. Your health challenges may change. They may get better. They may get worse. And don't assume they will never get better. There's always hope out there. There's always new things in the pipeline. How have your assets and net worth and income changed? What's your work situation? How has that changed? What about your family situation? Kids sometimes mature that you thought were irresponsible and now are ideally suited to help you and willing to help you. Other times it's the opposite. You may live in New York and your only child may have moved to Alaska, and now it's not practical for them to help. Laws change. You need to periodically review and revise your planning to keep it current. It is not a static process. Most significantly, once you've done the work of getting everything organized and getting your planning done, when you review it, you will catch things you missed the first time. When you sit down and do the documents you need, if you haven't done them, a power of attorney, a health proxy, all the things we reviewed in the prior steps, there are hundreds of decisions you may make to get those documents done. It's overwhelming for anybody. You're not going to think of all the other little minor or less critical issues while you're focused on the documents. So if in 6 months after finishing your documents, you sit back and reassess your situation, you're going to find more things. So it's got to be an ongoing process. It's got to go around. You've got to reconsider things. There are always changes. Let's, in closing, say, if you don't get started, if you don't commit to make steps, and that's why the little logo of the steps has been on all our slides, you're not going to accomplish anything. Even if some of the stuff in the presentation I've given you sounds basic, I assure you most people have not addressed it in enough depth or in enough detail, or if they have, they haven't organized it or communicated it. Don't get overwhelmed. I've been through this process. I still go through this process, and I've made a commitment to take little bites, and over long periods of time have made incredible progress. You need to do the same. Get started now. Make a commitment to do something. My belief is if you don't write it down and check it off, if you don't make a checklist, you're never going to get anything done. Every one of the 12 steps at the end, and we didn't go through it today, but I pointed out at a couple of places that it's there. After every step, there's 1 or 2 slides of action steps. Pick the ones that work for you and start at the top of the list and go through it. You may find you have some of the core documents in place. You can check those steps off and go on to the next one. Make a list of what works for you and get started. If you don't make a commitment, you will not protect yourselves or your loved ones. Please get started. I think we're done with the presentation. I'm sorry if I went a little too fast, but I wanted to make sure we had time to get through it on a sort of a high view basis. And if we want to open it for questions, we can do that. And if not, I have lots more I can talk to you about.
Great. Mr. Shenkman, thank you very much. That was really a terrific talk. We were on silent during your talk, and those around the table were saying this is what you gave us is good for anybody, anytime, not just the people living with Parkinson's. It was a very wonderful general presentation, but also organized in a way that all can access. So I want to thank you on behalf of everybody for just this terrific opportunity to explore this very important topic. We had 2 questions which are related, one from Missouri, one from New York City, had to do with resources and how you choose an estate planner, which is one of these 2 questions. Is there a degree, certification, an association that you look for, making sure you get the right person? And the second aspect of this, from New York, was any online resources or websites that you might recommend for finding the financial and legal planners you might work with. So how would you choose, where do you go to find an estate planner? And are there online resources that can help you do that?
I'm not aware of online resources. If you don't have an estate planner and you want to hire an estate planner, the best way to find an attorney specialized in estate planning is to contact another professional. A trust officer at a bank is the ideal person in the financial world. A sophisticated wealth manager that deals broadly with wealth management, not just investment decisions. A CPA would be an ideal person to recommend an estate planner in your area. You want to make sure that you hire somebody that practices in your state. The laws are very different from state to state. There are groups out there that purport to do estate planning on a nationwide basis, and they produce more generic documents. You really want somebody in your state, especially if there's any possibility that you are going to do Medicaid planning because you may need nursing home issues addressed. Those laws differ very, very much state by state. Now, I don't know if the person asking the question was asking in terms of online resources to prepare documents because they can't afford an attorney, but let me give you a very a different view than most lawyers. Most lawyers will tell you online document preparation is terrible and don't ever do it. The forms that you can get from online resources, and I won't name specific websites, there's a number of them, are actually in many cases more comprehensive than what many lawyers use. So it's not that their documents are bad. The problem with online document preparation that concerns me significantly, and I think they could all do a better job of it, is not that their software isn't good or their documents may not work, but in part there's no training for the consumer going to those sites. So if, for example, you went to one of the online websites to get a durable power of attorney because you truly don't feel you can afford an attorney, if they would not let you fill in the forms and the templates to do a power of attorney until after you watched and listened to a 1 hour or even two 1 hour videos on what a power of attorney is, what decisions are involved, something to educate you before you make the process happen, that would be more viable. I'm concerned that what they do is they give you lots of questions to answer that are overwhelming to a consumer, that a consumer can't possibly understand the nuances. So if you're going to have to use online resources, spend the time and the effort to read and study up before you do it. I also think that if you get the online resources and you look at the package cost of doing documents, in some cases you may be able to get an attorney for not that much more money. So just you have to kind of balance it. I hope that's answered the question.
Very good. Thank you very much. Here's a very practical, and given the breadth and depth of your presentation, it was a question that certainly occurred to me during your talk, but I haven't articulated it as well as this person has done himself. He's a bit mystified by the number of different specialists that you mentioned at the various 12 stages of your talk. And he's saying that if one is not a professional in this area, which most of us aren't, and if financial resources are limited, which they are for most of us, is there somebody you recommend going to first, not necessarily who could handle everything, but who would be a natural one-stop portal with one fee before going off into the different specialized areas, which could start to add up a lot on the way? Do you have any practical advice for that, Mr. Shenkman?
That's a great question, and I'm going to just kind of think out loud. One of the points that I tried to make was that the ideal way to do it, if there were no financial constraints, is you want a CPA to help you with your tax returns and your tax planning, a wealth manager to help you with your investments and your financial planning, and the CPA can help with that too, an estate planning attorney to prepare your documents, an insurance person to help you with insurance. Now, I said, because I'm very cognizant that not everybody can afford all of that, that if you can't, you need to make sure each of those functions is dealt with. So, for example, if you put your checkbook and your finances on Quicken or some other checkbook-type program, some people like Mint, there's lots of different options. I have my whole life on Quicken. Any of these programs, and they're not very costly, have an incredible array of financial forecasting, budgeting, and other tools that you can use. We could do a whole presentation on just how you use online or checkbook financial software to help protect you. So you can get a lot done with that. You can buy TurboTax or another comparable program, and many of them integrate with the financial software like Quicken or others so that you can prepare your own tax return and even do projections like that. You can go online to prepare your estate planning documents, but again, my concern or caution is not that you can't get documents that way, but that you be mindful that you need to really get educated as to the decisions you're making. Investment decisions, there's an array of excellent firms that have discounted fee structures for average Americans with a wealth of valuable online calculators. One of the things you might do, and this may be actually something the organization can do, if you get a group of people together because you can't afford to hire the array of professionals, and you share your experiences and help each other as you go through it, that could be very valuable too. Because let me tell you, one of the most important things that I have as an independent advisor when somebody comes to me, I'm not vested in your stories. When you walk in my office, I don't know all the stories or the history or the baggage or the dramas behind everything. I can look objectively at what's going on. it's very hard for any of us, me included, to look objectively at our own circumstances. So if you can partner with friends or others facing similar challenges with PD and go through it together, you can provide objectivity for each other as well. I hate to pin down saying one profession is more important than another because it really depends on your circumstances. Some of the good wealth management firms may be able to give you a lot of guidance in all these areas and then help you choose other advisors. So you may want to start with the finances, but again, depending on your circumstances, that may or may not be the priority. I hate to sound like a typical lawyer, but in that case, it kind of depends.
Thank you. Here we have a pair of questions dealing with different aspects of the same general topic of how you pay for services. From Missouri, we have a question as to, in general, understanding that price levels vary depending on the area of the country, what, Mr. Shenkman, should one expect to budget for good estate planning advice? And if you can give a range. And secondly, from California, for those who cannot afford legal or, for that matter, CPA services in connection with estate planning, to your knowledge, are there any services that are available free of charge or subsidized for those who cannot afford the full price?
I'm not aware of anything subsidized, but I think if you go online and you get a package of documents, and the PowerPoint that I have, if you print it out, will walk you through the documents that you likely need. And if you get them all as a package, I think some of the online software providers for legal documents will be able to give you a fairly reasonable cost for the documents you need. Before you commit to that, after you get the price, what you might want to do is contact your local bar association. Many younger lawyers will do work on a discounted basis that may not cost that much more. And while the lawyer may not have, the decades of experience that a more senior attorney does, you're still getting somebody with some training and wisdom that may be able to help you. The other thing that's intriguing, and it's kind of how technology is starting to equalize the field in lots of areas, there are attorneys that practice law virtually. Kind of online. You can meet with them, but they may not have the expensive offices and the overhead that bigger firms have, and as a result may offer much more reduced prices. So those are some of the ways to tackle that. I do believe that there may be some programs. I don't know what the Parkinson's Disease Foundation has or hasn't done in this regard, but there may be ways that they run symposiums where people come in and can help you at a more discounted rate. I mean, one of the things that may be intriguing, and I don't know if I'm getting out of where it's appropriate, if we do an online webinar where we spend one program talking about powers of attorney, another entire program talking about healthcare proxies, the knowledge you will get from a full hour talking about a single document, one program talking about how to use Quicken, and maybe we have an accountant do the program with me. We could give you a lot of knowledge so that you are then much more of an informed consumer when you go out and do something online. I think knowledge is critical. So if you can afford to hire the disciplines, that's great. If you can't, then you try to replicate those, and I've given you some specific ideas of software and things you can do to do that. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much. Great answer. They're great questions, by the way. None of the questions appear to have actually gone over material you already presented. That's partly because of our the strength of our people around this table, but we're very grateful to the people who have been very thoughtful asking the questions. Here's a couple of maybe narrower but very important questions, Mr. Shenkman. One from a person from North Carolina who's asking, if you have a partner but to whom you're not married, is there advantage in considering marriage as a way of intelligent financial planning, particularly if your partner has more money than you do?
Well, I'm not going to tell you to go out and get married if you don't want to. I mean, obviously, there's some significant personal issues with that. I can tell you that, one of the things you can do, and you could probably do this inexpensively on your own with some simple tax software like TurboTax. What are you paying in income tax filing separate returns as single individuals? what would you save if you filed married filing jointly? I have no idea what marriage may do to different benefit programs that you may get or pensions that you may have or options for spouses under a pension. Unmarried, you may not be able to give a joint and survivor annuity to a spouse. Married, perhaps you can. So you need to look at income taxes. You need to look at benefits that you may have. Certainly being married may make it easier than as a partner, although people have become a little more open-minded, in terms of visitation if, God forbid, one of you is sick and in a hospital or a nursing home. In terms of estate tax, obviously no one's going to tell me how much they're worth, but you can pass an unlimited amount of wealth to the surviving spouse. If you're not married, that amount of wealth is limited. Now, the amounts that you can pass without an estate tax under current law is kind of obscene. It's $5,450,000 this year. So if the wealthy of you has an estate that's beyond the roughly $5.5 million, marriage may be critical to passing that wealth to the survivor. And obviously, though, if you have that kind of wealth, you should be, using the full Monty of all the advisors to make sure you get this right. So estate tax used to be much larger of a factor. It may not be relevant now. Then again, and we may know tonight, if Hillary wins, she's made it pretty clear she wants to reduce the estate tax exemption amounts and make the estate tax much stricter. But, again, it depends on your wealth level, which obviously you're not going to say in a public forum.
Thank you, Mr. Shenkman. Maybe we should ask you to come back tomorrow so you can give a post-election answer to the same question.
Well, I hope I've proven I'm a lawyer because I think for each question I've had a multitude of answers. But bear in mind that's not because I'm trying to be difficult or make this complicated, but I want to make it real because giving you simple-minded answers that don't really respond properly is not going to help anybody do it. Everyone loves the feel-good of a simple answer, and when there's a simple answer, that's wonderful, but it doesn't always work. Let me just make also a general comment, which has addressed many of these points, and I apologize if I'm repeating, but it's quite important. When I approach planning and what somebody can do, I like to start with the optimal planning scenario. And I understand that the optimal planning scenario, hiring an accountant, an attorney, et cetera, is beyond the financial means of many people. Then I like to try to find ways to practically bring that down so more and more people can do it. But I'd like to set the gold standard of where you can be so you can get as close to that as is appropriate for your personal situation. So please don't be put off in any way when I've used things that may sound more expensive. It's not because I'm being insensitive. It's rather I'm trying to give you the standard you want to achieve. But I've tried throughout the talk to give you practical ways to reduce the costs and reduce the level. But again, it depends for each person. So, for example, for one listener, it may be that you need to spend more money to hire an estate planner to do documents because you don't have family to rely on. Somebody else may have, 6 brothers and sisters that they can trust with their life, and for them to name, do a simple power of attorney online, naming a succession of siblings may be more than adequate. I had a wonderful gentleman in my office a few weeks ago that's struggling with Parkinson's. His executive functioning has already been impacted, cognitive issues. He has no family members to name in any capacity. And I've been struggling to try to find ways to help him, and it's very difficult when there's nobody you can name to do anything. So I gave you an example. Instead of a healthcare proxy, you use a post. But if you have no one you can rely on, who do you name under a power of attorney? Very, very difficult. So, the reason I'm sometimes vague or covering a broad spectrum is you need to hone in on what works for you, and everybody's different. And that's the concern that I have, and it's not just with online legal documents, but it's even, frankly, how many lawyers or professionals handle planning. Lots of professionals have their way of doing things, and they kind of just template everything across whatever client walks in the door. You want to pick and choose what works for you. So somebody may be better off spending the money on their wealth manager and doing other things online. For others, it may be the opposite. But that's why I've tried to give you a spectrum of answers and a checklist for each of these steps so you can choose what works for you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you've just touched a nerve there. While you were creating that question about the issue of people who are living alone. I noticed we had a question from New York where somebody was saying she lives alone, has no children, what professionals should know about the arrangements. Another question from Illinois, recommendations of single people without family. I think in our discussions of these things, we often assume there are tighter families more available to us than there sometimes is true. And so I think you've touched a nerve there that we need to look into. I'm not sure we can cover it in this particular session, but we should find perhaps a way to flesh out a bit what might be resources for people who don't have... Yeah.
I'll give you a couple of really quick answers.
Please,
I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I will tell you that the traditional planning won't do the job. I'll tell you the ultimate plan, but we don't have enough time to say how to address this when there's not the same resources. You can do a living will for identifying your health care wishes. You do a POLST, which is not a perfect response, but it's a document in your medical records, because if you don't have anyone to name, you can't name a health care agent under a health care proxy. So do a living will and a POLST. You can't really do a power of attorney, but you could. But if you have the financial wherewithal, what you do is a revocable trust. You name a bank or trust company as co-trustee or successor trustee with you, consolidate your assets at that institution. If you've gotten all your assets at that institution, that trust company or bank may be willing to be a successor agent in a limited capacity under your power of attorney for the sole purpose of rolling assets into the revocable trust under which they have authority. If you do that, you've now incredibly well protected yourself, because the institution can step in as a trustee. They have all the checks and balances. If you select an institution that has a significant commitment to dealing with and helping people that have health issues, and not all have this, and many won't do it, you now have an optimal plan that will protect you forever. The issue becomes if you have inadequate resources to entice a trust company or bank to step into that role, what you do. And that's something I'm struggling to find an answer. And it bothers me deeply on a moral level that I've just given you an incredible answer to protect somebody that has no family, that's struggling with PD or any other chronic disease, but it doesn't work when you go down the wealth spectrum. And it's a sad reality in our country, unfortunately, that those with financial means can get so much better care and protection than those without. And if you can afford it, that's the optimal plan. If you can't, I'm still struggling on some answers, and we can talk. It'll take longer to explain them because they're much more obtuse.
That's really, it says a lot for you that you the way you handle that question, and some things we cannot answer with simple dictums of various sorts. And so thank you very much for showing that compassion, and we will see what we can do to maybe find ways to describe this stuff in ways that are accessible and helpful to people. I think we've one or two more questions we may just have time for. There are several others we won't have time for. And what I'm doing is what we always do, is to give these questions to our very competent advisors or online answer phone people who are standing ready and on this call as we're both speaking. And we will try to get back to you with answers to your questions with Mr. Shenkman's help if we need that in the next day or two, because unfortunately we won't have time to answer all of them. A couple of very quick ones that are easily dispatched. This is a person from Knoxville, Tennessee, Mr. Shenkman, and he simply says, my wife and I have one joint credit card account. Will she have trouble accessing funds and credit when I die, or should there be other arrangements made?
What I like to do is have each spouse have their own accounts. If you have an account that's joint, it's likely, for argument's sake, in the husband's Social Security number. When the husband dies, the wife may have a little bit of a challenge really using an account that's got his Social Security number on it. I prefer to keep things separate. I want both spouses to have credit cards in their own respective names and some investment accounts in their own names, because if something happens to one, the other's fine. And I'm going to give you another perspective on this, which is not the traditional view, but I don't think the traditional view works in the current environment we live in. Elder abuse, identity theft, these things are epidemic. 10 years ago, no one really even heard of these concepts. If you have everything in joint name, the odds are, and I don't mean to be politically incorrect, it's just the reality, when I see joint, it's almost invariably under the husband's Social Security number. If the husband's Social Security number gets scammed, what are you going to do while you're fighting that battle? If instead you have things split between two Social Security numbers, it's even safer. And if you follow the advice that I gave you in the presentation and you set up a revocable living trust, your IRAs and retirement plans will be under your Social Security number, whereas your other assets may be transferred to your revocable trust. You can't transfer retirement accounts. And if you heed my advice and get a separate tax ID number for the revocable trust, for a married couple, you now have 4 different numbers: husband and wife social, husband and wife's tax ID numbers on rev trusts, revocable trusts. You now have made it an incredibly more difficult task for anyone to really scam all of your assets because they're divided between 4 different identifying numbers.
Very helpful. Okay, I think we've come to the end of our time here. I'll just choose one other question before we thank Dr. Shenkman and move on. And try
My mother's going to love that, Dr. Shenkman. Thank you.
Oh, very good. I said, Doctor, well, you see, you've already graduated. All it takes is 1 hour with the PDF, and you get a complimentary doctorate. Don't advertise it too widely. I'm not sure the authorities will let us get away with that. But you obviously.
Can I write out prescriptions tonight?
I think you've already done that. You've already given us a very good prescription. This is a person from Wisconsin. Very straightforward question. I should have the answer myself, and I don't. If I have a spouse, I have early PD, do I still need a power of attorney, or is my wife automatically hold the power of attorney?
You absolutely need a power of attorney. You absolutely need every document that we talked about, as does your wife. I am less concerned that you go out and spend a fortune of money doing incredibly complex documents, but anyone on this call that's 18 and over, everybody, whether you have PD, don't have PD, everybody that's an adult should have a power of attorney, a health proxy unless they have nobody on the planet to name, a living will, especially if you have religious concerns. Everybody should have a will, and depending on your wealth level and your disease challenges, a revocable trust may make sense. Absolutely everybody should have a power of attorney.
Great. Very clear answer. I'm breaking my own rule. One more question, because it's generic, and it applies because it's generic to anybody living outside the United States who is accessing this program. We have a question from Oxford in the United Kingdom, and this person is saying, as an American living overseas, is there something special that we need to be aware of as overseas residents pertaining to American law on these subjects? What would be different in everything you've said for somebody who is resident overseas?
Well, a couple things. From a tax perspective, we have a very simple perspective in America, which you will all love. If you're an American, we don't care where you live. We are taxing you on worldwide income. There is a treaty between, I think you said, the UK and the U.S., but many countries have treaties, so you have to look at the treaty to see how that plays out. But the general starting point is the U.S. will tax you on every penny wherever on the planet you earn it. I don't know about interplanetary income, but I suspect the IRS would want to tax that too. From an estate planning perspective, and there's far fewer estate tax treaties, but from an estate tax perspective, we start with the same premise. If you're a U.S. citizen, we tax you on all your wealth, regardless of where on the planet it is. So from a tax perspective, you need to do your planning. If you expatriate, we tax you for doing that too. From a legal perspective, if you have assets in the U.S., since you may face a U.S. estate tax, if your estate is large enough, you probably should have documents here that will at least address your U.S. estate. From a legal perspective in a foreign country, you must consult a local attorney in that country. The laws in the U.S. seem far more complex when I've dealt with many of the situations overseas. In other words, you tend to need less intense documentation in many foreign countries, but I wouldn't want to make a generic statement because I don't know the laws in any country. So you really do need to speak to somebody in a foreign country. You also need to coordinate your U.S. and foreign planning because, for example, if you own a residence in a foreign country, how is that going to be taxed? How do they transfer assets on death? Many times what you'll find you want to do is have a will in the U.S. to govern U.S. assets and a separate will in a foreign country specifically and solely to govern the foreign assets. So the U.S. will and the foreign will may be coordinated by carving out the foreign assets out of the U.S. will in terms of dispositive planning and have a foreign will just governing those foreign assets. So it gets a little trickier, and you may want to coordinate both.
Thank you very much. Before we give a final resounding thank you to you for this terrific talk, I want to just give you 3 online compliments we've received, among many. One from New York, Mr. Shenkman. He apparently dropped the doctorate for this purpose. Best talk on this subject he's ever heard. From Massachusetts, there's a resounding thank you. And from Ohio, our one swing state in the poll, so incredibly useful. So that's 3 among many plaudits for your great performance. We really very much appreciate it. The business pieces, the usual ones for those of you who are old hands at this. Thank you for completing the online survey. Should be on your screen now. Your feedback helps us, as I think you know from the way we choose future webinars. So please, please make sure that you fill that out before this thing ends. I want to repeat also our thanks to our 3 corporate sponsors of the program today, AbbVie Incorporated, Acadia Pharmaceuticals, and Lundbeck LLC. We're very grateful to those fine companies for making this series possible. And finally, for those of you anxious to recommend this to all your friends or to relive it yourself, I'm happy to say an archive of the event today will be made available starting as usual 1 week from now, Tuesday, November 15th. Simply go to www.pdf, P as in Peter, D as in David, F as in Frank.org, and you can hear the whole thing again several times over. That's, I think, all the business. Mr. Shenkman, thank you for this terrific performance and presentation. I'm sorry that we weren't able to cover all the questions. We'll do our best afterwards, but be assured that we appreciate them all. We'll try to answer them all, and we're very grateful to Mr. Shenkman for this wonderful tour and tour de force through this very complicated subject. Thank you, everybody who came, everybody who attended. Thank you, Mr. Shenkman, and we'll see you next. And what is the date of the next webinar? Anybody? Thursday? So here it is. It is Tuesday, January 10 to 1 p.m. Eastern Time, Tuesday, January 10, 2017. We'll have Dr. Jory Fleischer, who is from NYU Langone Medical Center in New York, and will be speaking on the subject of pain in Parkinson's. I want to thank all of you. Thank also my colleagues at the table, Lisa Hoffman, Valerie Holt, Eli Pollard, who managed this series, and will be poring over all your questions and all the answers in preparing the documents on today's presentation. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of Election Day. I hope you, no, I don't necessarily hope you all win, but I do hope that we all feel that it was a process very, very well managed and ultimately will bring us into, I hope, a new and safe era. So let's thank you again, Mr. Shenkman. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you soon. Good fall season, and I hope we'll hear from you again in January. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.